today's lesson is over section 10.4, which is about triangles. So the main idea is to identify and classify triangles. So first, our vocabulary starts off with triangle, which we know two things about. Triangles have three sides, right? Here's a triangle. It's also going to have three angles, right? So three sides, three angles. Could be why they call it triangle, right? Congruent segments are two segments that are congruent. We typically will also call it they're equal, and they're shown by doing a dash through the middle. So we could also have, where for some reason if we had two triangles next to each other, you could show two dashes to show that sides are equal as well. It's just a way of labeling that those two with two dashes are equal. Next, we have acute triangle, right triangle, obtuse triangle. We will actually get into defining these in one more slide here. On to the next one, we have angles of a triangle. Angles of a triangle are going to add up to 180 degrees. So x plus y plus z, being the three different angles of a triangle, add up to 180 degrees, which is also a straight angle. Just kind of a little review there. A triangle is a figure with three sides and three angles we discussed. The symbol for the triangle is just kind of a miniature triangle, right? Just small little triangle. If we want to say scalene triangle, we could say scalene and then just a triangle sign. So down here, again, this was another reminder that those symbols are to show that they are congruent sides. To classify triangles using angles, there are three titles we can give it. So there can be an acute triangle, has three acute angles. Notice all angles are less than 90 degrees. So again, less than 90. A right triangle is going to have one angle that equals exactly 90 degrees because it has a right angle. We can also symbolize that by the little square in the corner. So whenever you're asked to do your own right triangle, you might not make a perfect straight line down and straight line up, but if you put that little square there, that'll help them see that that is indeed a right triangle. Obtuse triangle is going to have one obtuse angle, and that obtuse angle is going to be greater than 90 degrees. So the other way we can classify triangles is using the sides. So if we look at our triangle, we do not have any congruent sides. That can be called a scalene triangle. If we have at least two congruent sides, typically they're right across, they're connected to each other in a triangle. So again, you see those symbols again. Those are going to be called an isosceles triangle. Typically with an isosceles triangle, we'll also have two equal angles in the bottom. Lastly, there's an equilateral triangle. This can also be considered an isosceles triangle because of the phrasing that an isosceles has at least two. So if you had three, you could still be considered isosceles, but we would also more specifically call that an equilateral triangle. Notice that if we're using sides, we can also have angle congruency as well. So this one would be also an acute triangle. So we could have an acute scalene triangle. It could have two labels. This one is again acute isosceles. And the three congruent sides is mainly just going to be, again, acute, because each angle is going to be 60 degrees. All angles are equal as well. Finding the value of x is going to be the big piece of our homework. So we're going to try a couple examples where we're finding the value of x in a triangle. We're going to have two of the three angles given to us. In this case, we have 42 and 36. So we need to do a little math to solve for that last angle. One other piece we need to remember is the angles add up to 180 degrees. So to find the value of x, we're going to say x plus these two angles, 36 degrees and 42 degrees, equals 180 degrees since it is a triangle. 36 plus 42 will give me 78. So x plus 78 equals 180 degrees. Subtract 78 from each side, and x equals 102 degrees. Pretty basic steps there. You might take up 2-3 lines on the homework, but not a lot of work to show. So that's the work I expect people to show on their homework. Going down here, one might say we only have 2 angles given to us. But we have to remember that anytime we have that little box there, that's 90 degrees. So they don't need to write 90 degrees. We're supposed to know that. So x plus 90 degrees plus 35 degrees is going to give us 180. 90 plus 35 is going to give us 125 degrees, again equal to 180, and now we subtract 125 from each side. Got to keep the equation equal, bring our equal sign down. 180 minus 125 will give us 55 degrees. Now we're going to go back and finish the problem, as the problem does say then classify the triangle. At the top we notice we have an angle above 100 degrees, so this is going to make it an obtuse triangle. Since we aren't giving any information about the side, we'll just leave it at that. But typically we'd be able to also say that that triangle is most likely scalene as well. On the bottom here, again we have 55, 35, and 90. 90 degrees is going to hint to us that that's a right angle, so we're going to have a right triangle. And again, notice right triangle symbol. Another example here. We have solve for x and then classify the triangle. This time we have 23 degrees, 128 degrees, and x degrees equals 180. 128 plus 23, we're going to have 151 degrees plus x equals 180. Subtracting 151 from each side, x is going to be equal to 29 degrees. Now, this triangle is again going to be obtuse because we have degrees over 90. We have one angle over 90. So obtuse triangle because we have the obtuse angle. Down here, right off the bat, we could identify this triangle because it shows us the 3 markings again to say that that is equilateral. Each side is equal. Right? Because each side is equal, each angle should be equal, but let's use our theorem here to check it out. X plus 60 equals 180. So we got to subtract 120 from each side. We get x equals 60 degrees. Continuing now, we'll have a couple other problems in the homework having to do with drawing triangles that satisfy each set of condition. Now this is where we want you to use your tools that we've given you. Again, we want to use the 90-degree box, and we also want to use the congruent symbols whenever we need to. So to draw a triangle with a right angle and no congruent sides, we want to do kind of maybe a short side and then a sharp L. You can do a little better than that. Short side and a slight L, right? Now, someone can get out a protractor and check that out and find out that that's not 90 degrees. Might not exactly be 90 degrees, might be 89, might be 91. So we want to make sure we put that right angle symbol there. Then we're just going to connect the sides. And we don't need to worry about the long side being equal to either side. We just want to make sure that our, we'll call this our leg over here, is shorter or quite larger than our base. Because those are the only two that can potentially be equal. And with that, that is done. We don't need to put any markings on there besides that right angle. Next, a triangle with 3 congruent sides. So let's make a triangle that has sides that are similar as we can. And so if someone doesn't measure ours and say, hey, it's not equal, let's mark them that they're equal. The alternative would be, of course, get out a ruler and try to make perfect 1-inch lines on each one. Make sure they're 60 degrees each with protractor, but that would be putting a lot more work than you need to. As long as you show these signs, they're going to assume that you have an equilateral triangle. Last one, we have a triangle with 3 acute angles and 2 congruent sides. So I like to think about kind of a Christmas tree showing this one, because they're going to be all acute angles. Both the left and right side of your Christmas tree, as long as it's not slanted, should be facing straight up and should be the same height. So this gives us an isosceles triangle. Going back up to the triangle with 3 congruent sides, this one was an equilateral triangle. Again, we have to classify these. We could also say it was an acute equilateral triangle, because all equilaterals are going to be acute. And lastly, that one on the top was a right triangle. We could also consider that a right scalene triangle, because none of our sides were congruent. With that, our lesson is wrapped up for today. Feel free to try out some of the tutor quizzes or the peer tutors to test out your skills.